Are you ready to make an offer on a house? Welcome to part 3 of the First Time Homebuyer Guide series for 2026. If you are just catching this video, I have a part 1 and part 2 to this series, so I definitely recommend that you go back and watch those. If you've already watched part 1 and part 2, let's get into it. Let's go over a quick recap of what you should have already accomplished. So you have chosen the best real estate agent. You have chosen the best lender because once again, this is one of the biggest transactions that you will ever do probably in your whole entire life. So who you work with matters. We have went house hunting based on your budget and your search criteria of what you're looking for. And now we have found the house that you want to make an offer on. When submitting an offer, we are going to be analyzing the data and we're going to be analyzing your emotions. My job as a real estate agent is to keep you emotionally grounded. This is a very, very intense process and it can have a lot of ups and downs and you feel like you're on a roller coaster ride while you're buying a house. But we can definitely manage that throughout the transaction with making an offer. The data we're going to be analyzing is whether they have priced the property correctly based on current market conditions, whether they have priced it correctly based on major systems in the house, such as the roof, HVAC, water heater. Sometimes if they don't provide that knowledge of the ages of the systems, we can't get more in depth until we get an inspection, but we'll talk about that in another part of the series. We analyze the data so that we can come up with the terms of our offer. Now, the emotional side is going to be whether this house fits the functionality that you're needing, the location that you're needing. If you have a job in a specific area and you don't want X amount of commute, then we have to make sure that we found a house that meets that criteria. Does it meet the budget, and is it over your budget? Is it exactly where you want to be? Is it a little bit lower where you have some breathing room? How do you feel about all those things? That is what we're going to compile everything into to be able to come up with an offer. Okay, we are going to dive into the terms that majority of all offers are going to include. I do want to say that even if you're not buying in my market, this is still going to be helpful for you because you still need to have a basic understanding. So here we go. The very first thing is going to be the purchase price. What are you going to offer for the house? Now, the listing agent and the seller have come up with a price of what they've listed it. And then this comes into play of the data that we've analyzed as far as the market conditions, if they priced it correctly, and then also your emotions. How badly do you want the house? Does it fit all your needs? If it doesn't, then we probably shouldn't be making an offer on it, but you want to analyze all those things to be able to come up with a good strategic purchase price. Also, in some markets, not right now currently, but in some markets when it's a competitive market for buyers and there's multiple offers on houses, you really have to be strategic with your offer. So just keep that in mind as well. So we come up with the purchase price, which is going to be the price that you're going to get your loan for. Depending on what type of loan, that's going to determine your down payment, your closing costs. All of those things are important factors when it comes to the purchase price. I also want to just briefly say that when you're buying a house, if you're going into it with a thought process like I'm only going to offer $50,000 to $100,000 less on every single house that we are going to be looking at, then you might not want to waste your agent's time. You might just want to go do that on your own or go look at a foreclosure because majority of the time you're just going to be spinning your wheels in mud if it's actual property that's been listed and marketed correctly. All right, the next item that we're going to talk about when it comes to making an offer is earnest money. So earnest money is your good faith deposit, basically your skin in the game that you are willing to risk this money in order to go under contract for the seller to be able to pull the property off of the market so that you are the one that's under contract for it. For example, if you are purchasing a house and it's $400,000, then 1% could be the amount of earnest money that you put down to make a strong offer, which would be $4,000. Keep in mind that earnest money is something that is due right away. So once all parties agree to the contract and it is a binding contract between the seller and the buyer, that earnest money is usually due within a few days after the contract and it gets held into an escrow account of your choosing. So it could be the title company, it could be the closing attorney, it could be the buyer agent's brokerage, it could be the listing agent's brokerage, but it gets held into that escrow account until closing and it goes towards your total cash to close. The earnest money is very important because it really shows the seller that you're willing to risk that money in order to go under contract, that you're a serious buyer. I do want to share a story. I had a buyer who thought that earnest money was not important at all, and every single offer that she tried to make ended up getting denied because the sellers did not take her seriously, that she was not putting earnest money into her offer, that she did not end up finding a house, and I ended up firing her as a client. So don't be that buyer, and just make sure that you understand what earnest money is and how powerful it is within an offer. The next item we're going to talk about is due diligence. So due diligence is your inspection period as a buyer. So this is where you get any and all types of inspections done on the house. Keep in mind, this is all at your expense because you're the one buying the house and you're the one wanting to make sure that the conditions are what you think they are. So typically most buyers get a home inspection, which home inspections, depending on the size of the house, can range anywhere from $450 to $600 plus, just depending on how big the house is. So an inspector will go in and give you a report, which I'll do a video later breaking down further what an inspection is, but they give you a report of what they found wrong with the house, and they could be all little things, it could be major things, but basically during this time period, if there's something that's found that you don't feel comfortable with, you can have it further looked into by a specific professional. So for example, if the HVAC unit is showing signs of not working properly and you want an actual HVAC tech to go and look at it, then you have that time period during the due diligence to be able to accomplish that. If there's something that is not able to be negotiated with the seller for repair credit or a repair, then that's when you're able to terminate the contract and you get your earnest money back during the due diligence period. If it's after the due diligence period, your earnest money will go towards the seller if you just get cold feet and you want to end up canceling the contract just because you don't want to buy the house anymore. The next item we're going to talk about is the closing date. This is super important, and it falls under the time frame topic that we discussed before. So this is really where it's important to understand when you're trying to accomplish purchasing the home, when the seller is able to get out, if you have a lease in place with an apartment company and you need to have it line up at a certain time, just making sure that your real estate agent understands that and your lender understands that, so everybody can work as a team to be able to get you the best closing date. In my market, normal closings are 30 to 45 days, but you would have to check with your real estate agent wherever you're purchasing to make sure that you understand how long it takes, how long the process normally takes. The closing date is the actual day that you end up getting ownership of the house. So make sure that it's a date that works for you, and normally closings only happen Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So keep that in mind as well. Next thing we're going to talk about is closing costs. So this is where a buyer is requesting that a seller cover a certain amount of closing costs, which closing costs are always associated with the buyer's expense. So closing costs are going to include your loan fees, your loan origination fees, your lender fees, if you're buying down points, your 12 months of homeowner's insurance is usually included in that, prorated property taxes, any recording fees, closing attorney or title fees, owner's title policies, all these are incorporated into the closing costs, and they are all the buyer's expense. Now, when it's a buyer's market, like it currently is right now, which we're in April of 2026, then majority of the time you can negotiate that the sellers pay some or all of the closing costs. It really just depends on the situation. It also depends on how strong your purchase price term was and all the rest of the terms in the contract. But the closing costs are essentially what the seller is willing to cover for you to be able to purchase the house. Also keep in mind that if you don't have the amount of closing costs saved up to be able to buy a house, majority of the time you're going to be in a situation where the seller does have to pay the closing costs. And if you find a house that the seller's not willing to, then you're just going to have to move on to a different house because it's not worth your time continuously trying to make it work if the seller's not willing to budge at all. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to terms, and this is very general because there are a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to making an offer for a property. Last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to terms of an offer is going to be any type of special request. So these are going to be items that are outside of the normal contract terms. And for my market, for example, asking for a home warranty, asking for the house to be professionally cleaned, Yes, as a buyer, you might think that a seller would clean the house for you before you move in because they're kind, but don't expect that because that's not something that happens all the time. If there's specific appliances that are not marked as staying that you want to stay, then you have to write that in the contract. If you want a termite bond, like in my market, if they don't have a termite bond on the property and you need a termite bond or want one, that's something that you would add into the special request. So that just comes into play with working with an agent that's experienced and can guide you on things that maybe you don't know to ask for, or maybe just walking you through what that looks like. The next part of the contract is usually going to be any disclosures or exhibits that are attached to the contract. So you have your purchase and sale agreement, which is going to be all the terms that we talked about. It will include the seller's disclosures, which are anything that the seller has disclosed about the property, such as any insurance claims, if there's been any structural updates, what items are going to be remaining with the property at the time of the sale. And then the next item is usually going to be the community association disclosures if it's in an HOA. If it's not in an HOA, you won't see the community disclosures. But if it is in an HOA, then they have to disclose what type of HOA membership it is, how much it is, if there's any transfer fees, what is the responsibility of the HOA, and also the HOA contact information. And then also sometimes in contracts, you will see compensation agreements between the buyer agent and the listing agent, who's paying what and how. And that is really good to be able to include in the offer, just so there's no surprises when it comes to how your agent's getting paid and how the listing agent's getting paid. All right, that wraps it up for making an offer. I'm so excited for you that you got to part 3. If you know anyone who is looking to purchase a house and it's their first time, or maybe they haven't bought a house in a very long time, please share this video series with them. I have a playlist on my YouTube for this series specifically, so I'm super excited to bring you more information, and I hope you have a great day.